The Irishman is finally out on Netflix after a long, long wait. And if you don't know why I'm excited, it's the new gangster epic made by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci. And I want to start with the background of how it was created in the first place. Scorsese was floating the idea for the film for several years now, initially pitched it to De Niro as an original story, only partly inspired by him having read the book I Heard You Paint Houses. De Niro convinced Scorsese to actually adapt the book instead of doing an original story. The book, which tells the life story of Frank Sheeran, the titular Irishman, and his rise through the ranks of the East Coast mob as a hitman, and his relationship to Jimmy Hoffa, a longtime president of the biggest drivers' union in the US. So Scorsese then tried to get a film studio to fund the thing, but there was a problem. First of all, none of the studios thought that there was a market for such a film in the current day. Second, because of the grand scope and other high-profile actors that Scorsese had in mind, he requested a budget of $100 million. That presented an issue until Netflix finally came around and agreed to fund the movie. They considered it an important missing piece in their library at the time, to have original movies made for them by acclaimed directors with acclaimed actors, to try and shake this label of a Netflix film, which we often associate with mediocre movies. Of course, the downside for Scorsese and moviegoers around the world is that because of Netflix's condition to have the movie available on their platform no longer than 30 days after the premiere at the movie theaters, the vast majority of those theaters just completely passed on it. The condition was unacceptable. So unless you live very close to one of the few that do play it, Netflix is the only chance of seeing the film, and you have to do it at home. Okay, so with the budget secured, Scorsese went around to complete the cast. He already had De Niro as Sheeran and got Pacino as Hoffa. He also wanted Joe Pesci for the role of Russell Bufalino, but again, the problem was that Pesci had been retired for several years now. According to sources, Scorsese approached him over 50 times to come and do the movie, with Pesci initially just telling him to fuck off, but eventually, after many conversations, finally agreeing to do the film. Then there was the final issue of the age of the actors. All three are now in their 70s, whereas the movie portrays them throughout several decades, with most of the story taking place when the characters were somewhere between 40 and 60. Scorsese explicitly didn't want to use makeup or prosthetics or stand-ins for the actors. He just shot the scenes with them as they were, and then in post-production he intended to digitally de-age them, particularly the faces. Now this was something that hasn't been done before, not on this scale certainly. Sure, Marvel is a notable example of de-aging actors, but that's mostly been done for a scene or two, the only exception being Samuel L. Jackson in Captain Marvel, but if you look at the photo comparisons, it was much easier, as the man seems to not have aged all that much in the last 30 years or so. With this cast, the challenge was much more difficult because of how different now they look, and also because of how much screen time they would have in the film. Industrial Light and Magic was hired to do the job. If you don't know, this company is an absolute titan in the visual effects industry, known mostly for the Star Wars franchise. So, okay, there was a certain amount of trust, but we still didn't really know how it was going to work out, how it was going to turn out in the end product. And solving the age problem in turn created two new ones. First one was the budget. It went up from $100 million to somewhere around $175 million. The second one was time. After the shoot itself ended back in 2018, after over 100 days, which was the longest shoot in Scorsese's career, it took almost another whole year to do the de-aging work. The film is finally out though, and I was able to confront the expectations with reality. Even just planning to watch it though was a logistical challenge, because the runtime is 3 hours and 30 minutes. It's the longest film Scorsese ever made, and because it was technically released in some movie theaters, it is also the longest running movie released in theaters in 20 years. One has to wonder if maybe the long runtime is a result of the freedom that Scorsese had. No studio execs telling him to cut it down to something more reasonable. Anyway, let's talk about the film itself. not to make the wait any longer, I think it's brilliant. The runtime makes it in no way sluggish or boring. If I had to describe the pace, I would probably use the word unhurried. The plot doesn't necessarily speed forward, but that's fine because you enjoy the time spent in the world of the film. It's also justified by the amount of time that passes in the story. As I said, the story spans decades. There's also the vast amount of little nuances and subplots that happen, and the events that it covers, and the amount of characters that pass through it. I think that it manages to be this magical closing chapter for movies such as Goodfellas and Casino and The Godfather as well. It takes a lot from all of those, but it manages to add something new to the mix. Similarly to the previous Scorsese gangster films, it uses familiar tricks like voiceover narration. This one, though, it is framed as the old Frank Sheeran telling his life story, almost at his deathbed. So at the same time, we get unreliable narrator as well as that unique feel of reminiscing, of revisiting tales from time long gone, which is a feel that I personally adore. I think it's a love letter to storytelling in general. Going back to the de-aging, I think it's worked out really well, and honestly, it's impressive and a bit scary at the same time. At no point did I think something was wrong with the younger faces, although you can see the age of the actors showing through their movements. You can see how they're more stiff, not as energetic as they would be in that age. But fuck it, I'm willing to forgive it because despite that, all three of the main actors give stellar performances. In fact, I've been thinking about which one I like the most, and I think I still have a hard time deciding. De Niro plays Sheeran as this relatively simple man who follows orders, tries to make the best for himself, and isn't consumed by ego. Is generally liked, and you can see why. He makes himself likable in an effortless way. He's humble and easygoing, but through subtle acting, you can see how he is often hesitant or even regretful about the things that he is forced to do as a hitman. Pacino is much more energetic and frantic. There's a wonderful scene, probably my favorite of the film, where he freaks out and shouts and screams at other union executives, and right afterwards has a conversation with De Niro to try and apologize to him and calm him down. Just brilliant acting. Pacino is very convincing as this man who is used to power, so used to it in fact that he begins to let it take control over him. He tends to be condescending and disrespectful towards other people, but he's definitely also cunning and smart. And finally, we have Pesci. He's typically known for those dynamic performances with loads of shouting and swearing and just being unpredictably scary, volatile even. This one is completely different. He plays a mob boss that is almost stoic, very calm, very composed, soft spoken, but underneath it all, you can see that he commands respect in an effortless way. I think he sells that duality in a perfect way, and it's quite impressive for him to do so, to do such a subdued performance in comparison to what he's known for. All the other actors and actresses in the film are solid as well. So is the cinematography, so is the music. I could talk about all those elements individually, but I don't think there's a point really. It's all up there at the high level that Scorsese has gotten us used to. I think The Irishman as a whole is fantastic, and I think it is fantastic that it was created in the first place, because there is something about it, about the way the story itself works, but also about how the movie was created and by whom, that says, look, this is a movie from a different time. These are people from a different time. It's representative of an entirely different genre and era of filmmaking, of an era that is mostly closed now, has been for years. And this movie has Scorsese, De Niro, Pacino, and Pesci all going, yeah, it's all in the past now, but we can show you that we've still got it, that we can make a movie like this and have it be brilliant one last final time. Because again, there is that underlying sense of finality in it, partly due to the way old Sheeran narrates and recounts the story, and partly due to the fact that, let's face it, these are all old guys now. What's the chance that they come together again, ever again, to create something like this? What is the chance that we get an acclaimed director, some of the best actors of their generation, all giving incredible, nuanced, invested performances in a movie that is not designed to be a crowd pleaser, not a 2 hour blockbuster filled with explosions and one liners, but a 3.5 hour long crime biopic. I think that chance is probably zero. I think this may have been this last supper of sorts of the old guard of Hollywood. The legends coming together one more time to say one last thing, and that's it. Now we can really close this chapter in filmmaking. And for that reason, I think we should appreciate The Irishman even more, because it manages to be successful at being a fantastic crime epic in an era where crime epics like that don't exist anymore and maybe never will again.